Year one, we hired 18 people. Year two was like 50. Year three was 100. I hired over 400 people. I have companies where I'm an investor, not a board member, where I'm an investor and a board observer, where I'm an investor and a board member. We spent the last 5 to 8 years figuring out how to automate everything, and that has led to really high volume of really bad emails getting sent. We're excited about vertical software as there is still opportunity for a lot of disruption. I don't think many of the companies, seed or a Series A, have like a true defensible competitive advantage today. We think what's differentiated that could be defensible in the future.
Today, we get to speak to Liz Christo. Liz joined NetSuite, which was the first cloud computing company, through the business development program from 0 employees to 170 employees in just 4 years, ultimately acquired by Oracle for $9 billion. Following that experience, Liz joined OpenView, a VC fund with over $2 billion under management, and now she's currently a GP at Stage 2 Capital, writing seed and Series A checks in B2B software companies. Let's get stuck in. But just before we do, let me introduce this week's sponsor of the OpenVC Podcast, Intercom.com. Intercom help founders by making your customer service 24/7. Through their use of innovative AI, you can answer 50% of your customer needs instantly. Intercom is offering 1 year free if you use the code OpenVC, all in caps, at the checkout using the link in the description below. And let's get back to the episode. Welcome, Liz, to season 1 of the OpenVC podcast. It's an absolute pleasure to have you here. You've got a great mix of operational experience and investing experience. I'd like to take you back to your operating career. You joined NetSuite back in 2008, which is the very first cloud computing company in the world. Ultimately, it was acquired by Oracle for $9 billion. And you found yourself growing the business development platform from no employees to over 170 in under 4 years. Could you just tell us a little bit about the journey?
My story of joining NetSuite is sort of an odd one. I was working for a small startup called OpenAir that got acquired by NetSuite. So I got to join the NetSuite rocket ship. I started in sales operations and got to know the back office of the sales team very well. I worked closely with the leadership team. I worked on all of our acquired products because I came in through acquisition. I had the opportunity to lead an account management group selling into our install base, building out a team that was responsible for renewals and upsell, and it was going really well. Went out and hired folks who didn't have, as much of a sales background. They were more like industry experts and really knew the market and the customer very well, and then trained them up on how to actually manage a quota and grow a book of business. And towards the end of that year, we were looking around and the company was trying to figure out, how do we build a bench of future sellers? So there are just not that many ERP sellers in the world that we can go out and hire. And we're selling to CFOs, so it was one. And so we were trying to figure out, how can we actually accelerate the pace of hiring? And what that came down to was building that bench internally. And so I had the opportunity to put my hand up and say, that got me excited. I really liked the idea of training, of building that team, of thinking about that next generation of sellers. And that's what the kind of foundation of that BDR program was. Year one, we hired 18 people. Year two was something like 50. Year three was like 100. I think I hired over 400 people during my time there. But at any given time, it was, in the hundreds that were in seat. And then the goal was basically train, lead gen, get promoted within 12 months and kind of jump into that full quota-bearing role.
Going back to the beginning, have you always been in startups? So you're in a startup that was acquired. That must have been quite early in your career. You had a high risk tolerance straight from the get-go?
Or maybe I didn't know better. So I think, for me, I knew that I wanted to work in a smaller company. I wanted to be highly innovative. I wanted to build something. I wanted to work with great people. Really, the goal for me was find a place where I can have impact. And that led me to startups and tech. And then I got to grow with NetSuite till they were, 5,000 employees, over $1 billion in revenue. And with that in mind, I was itching to get back to earlier. And I thought about the tenure of my time there and where I feel like I did my best work. And, there were amazing things that I got to do later, but the early days when it was a smaller team, I felt was where I really thrived and wanted to get back to that.
Well, that risk tolerance has stuck with you because you volunteered for this intense job where there was no rights, there was no template for you to follow. You had to actually build and train your own program. What kind of things did you find yourself learning in that process that you could pass on to fellow founders today?
Just how important hiring is. There's so many learnings along the way. I don't want to minimize that, but I think about the team that I got to build there. We put like a ton of effort into hiring strong A players, and that showed. I look now at like the legacy that team has left, and many of them still work at NetSuite more than a decade later, which is just kind of crazy to see. I think about the success of that program, and it wouldn't have been that way if we hadn't put so much effort on recruiting. And that happened in a lot of different ways. I think we were early adopters of a technology called HireView, and the idea was we have this really large distributed team. We have managers who are out here hiring individual teams. Like, how do we create some consistency in our process? How do we coach those managers to ask the right questions, to really dig in? And that actually like required a lot of thought, of scripted process, coaching on the actual interviews themselves. Like, I was spending 50% of my time on just interviewing.
You're decentralizing the hiring process and empowering your managers to do it themselves, which would have involved identifying their own biases, trying to help them ask the right questions and actually identify what's being said in an answer. Were you looking for any like other leading points of data on candidates before they'd even make it to an interview? Because I know you're very much into leading indicators now in the go-to-market strategy. Did you employ a similar type of thinking for the hiring?
We were hiring people with, less than 2 years of work experience. I don't think this is like standard across all hiring I do now, but there were a couple of signals that I thought were actually really helpful. I didn't care what, college or university you went to or if you went to one, but I like to see that like people were involved and that they pushed themselves. So that might be like excellence in academics. That might be working while you were in college. That might be how you showed up for sports. Or I just wanted to show that you were like engaged and worked hard at whatever you were doing. And then the second thing, how you wrote your resume really mattered. You have one chance for a first impression. And if we picked that up and there were like 3 typos on it, I was like, I can't. If you didn't care when you were writing this and putting like your best foot forward, it was going to be pretty hard to teach you to send 100 emails a day and like be on it.
I'm sure. It's even harder for employers now to scan for that because of things like ChatGPT and things people do to help write their cover letters and improve their quality of writing beyond what they'd naturally be able to. Those are some really good leading indicators. Thank you for sharing those.
For sure.
So after NetSuite, you've got all this learning. You moved across the table into a venture fund, and a huge venture fund with over $2 billion under management today. How did you find that transition from startup, operator, high growth into picking investments and actually helping with other startups' go-to-market strategy?
So my path was actually a fairly interesting one. I came on as an operating partner at OpenView, and my role was really focused on post-investment to start. They had a team of partners that were responsible for doing deals, and then I joined to lead the post-investment group, and it was a team of consultants and recruiters that worked closely with the companies. It was really like, take what you learned in your career and apply it across these companies. And at the time, they were really trying to think about how do we scale that outbound motion across many companies. That was the work that I had been doing. Pretty quickly that evolved, and I was doing a whole bunch of different things related to go-to-market strategy. But my first foray in was on the operating side. And I share that because it was a really tough transition, because I went from being in a role where like I was the decision maker and I could decide something, whether that's about process or structure or hiring, and we could like roll it out quickly, to being in a role where I had to influence others. So I was working with 30-ish portfolio companies and probably closely with 5 to 10 at any given time. And you would kind of get on the phone and you'd see all these things that could be done differently. And the most critical thing I could do was narrow that down to like, what are the 1 to 3 things that are going to have the most impact? And I remember in my early days, I was sharing all this feedback. It was like, okay, here are the 20 things we're going to do. But you've got a really small, generally understaffed, hardworking team who can't tackle 20 things at once in addition to what they're already doing. And so figuring out prioritization and focus was like something I had to do fast. And then figuring out how to kind of bridge the gap between here's what I see as sort of an outsider looking in, and knowing you're never going to know the business as well as people who are in it every single day. And so you have to sort of like walk this line of, I can share patterns and I can share observations and recommendations, but like you as the business are the decider, and being really careful not to cross that line and realize you can't know it better than them, nor should you. And your goal is just to try to inject some ideas and support when they need it, not on your own agenda.
In terms of influencing founders, if you're an operating partner at a VC fund, there are probably good discussions and bad discussions. Good ones being where the operators are looking for an answer and maybe you're able to provide some experience and some lessons learned along the way. Bad ones being, we think you're maybe doing something wrong here, and here's why. How did you find yourself changing your approach over time, if at all, to make yourself more effective in that communication?
Yeah.
Because it's true for investors as well. It's not just operating partners. Anyone trying to tell a founder to do something, it's not necessarily an easy conversation.
So I might kind of span the last decade of my career as I give this answer, but I started in an operating partner role. I moved into an investing role. Today I have companies where I'm an investor, not a board member, where I'm an investor and a board observer, where I'm an investor and a board member. And like there are different roles you need to play from like a governance standpoint, but beyond that, it's all influence. Basically, the job is the same here. You are an outsider looking in. You are on the same team. You want these great outcomes for the company, but you're not in the operating seat anymore. And so I'm really careful, or I try to be really careful, not to overstep and to focus on what I think the most important things are and bring them up, hold up that mirror, share what I see, and then figure out if there's something that we can or should work on together, or if it's something that is not a priority to the company, letting it go. And I find that the places where like I spend the most time, given my experience, number one is team. Often founders haven't hired a VP of sales before or haven't hired a insert title and role here. And so part of what we can do is help calibrate, like, what does an A player look like? What does that experience look like? Can we make intros to folks who like help them set their bar or help interview knowing that like I've hired hundreds of these roles? Does that make it easier for them? So that's one. And then I think the second place that I spend a lot of time is on go-to-market, just given my background. And again, I find that the role is generally helping people focus. Everybody, the tendency is to take on too much, and you're going to get more done if you have a narrower scope. And so helping just like refine down the set of goals. And then look, like, over time, there's plenty of times we'll share an idea or see something that we want someone to look at, but I try really hard not to have too much of an agenda walking in. You kind of alluded to this, but I think one of the interesting things is like, there's a whole spectrum of ways to work with a company. There is like hand raise, a CEO is saying, I need help with X. And then there's an observation where you're like, okay, I really think we need this to happen. And then there's collective board alignment that something needs to occur and you're diving in. And any of those scenarios, like, it starts with the CEO. It is all about having a relationship where you can have an honest conversation and working together to figure out kind of what the next steps are.
There is no one set answer. The situation changes, and also people's response, how people respond to the type of feedback they're given. Some people are very good at receiving constructive feedback. Yeah. Others find it as an attack on their character that wounds them deeply in their soul. As a founder, hopefully you're more open to feedback than the normal person, because you're going to get things wrong. There's just too many things to do. It's inevitable.
That's what we look for in our investment process. Like, we have built the CEO scorecard of like traits we really care about and things we're looking for in a CEO. And one of them is definitely the ability, not just ability, but like seeking out other opinions and like learning and ingesting all of that, but then using it to make your own decision. Because it's not about, they told me to do that, so I'm going to go do it. No, it's like, who can you learn from? Who are the experts on insert problem here? And then go make your own decision and act.
When you joined OpenView as an operating partner, did you intend to become an investing partner? Or is that something that you ended up deciding was maybe your career path?
No, it's a great question. I did not.
Okay.
When I joined OpenView, in my mind, I was likely going to be there for 1 or 2 years, and my goal was like meet all the portfolio companies, figure out where I would want to take an operating role and dive back in. And I really fell in love with kind of consulting outside in view and with venture generally. I think the opportunity to both basically learn professionally. I feel like my job is you find something interesting, learn as much as you can about it, and decide if you want to make a bet there. Like, that's really cool. And then help these companies grow. And the opportunity to do that across a bunch of companies presented a totally different set of challenges and opportunities to me, but I really loved it. So no, it's not what I set out to do, but definitely where I ended up.
How does it change what you do within a VC fund when you move from an operating partner to an investing partner?
The job becomes way more focused on sourcing, like identifying great companies and decision making. And I think, what's interesting, parallels in my career. A lot of investing is an enterprise sales process. And so, there's always a buying and selling motion going on. The buying side, that was a learning curve for me of figuring out what are the things I need to learn about a business? What do I value as an investor? What am I looking for? And then marrying that with the firm you're at, because you ultimately have to find deals that fit the fund mandate and the fund construction that you're looking to build. And so the deals we looked at OpenView are different than the deals I look at today at Stage 2. There's definitely some overlap. They're all B2B software, but the stage, the qualities, the thing that make it a home run deal for us, they're different. But the other side, the selling, is actually, I think, what looks almost the same. So if I think about my average day, week, month now, I'm reading up on, insert any kind of research here, finding companies I'm excited about, reaching out to them. It is the job of a BDR. You are writing cold emails. You are trying to get in touch with the CEO when they are also getting bombarded by a bunch of other investors, getting on the phone, deciding whether or not pretty quickly that's a qualified deal for you and could be a fit in the future. And then for the ones that you're excited about, you're nurturing those for a long time, generally over the course of many months before there's even an opportunity to put a deal on the table. And then either they're raising or you're trying to catalyze a deal. And it is an enterprise sales process. You nurture this over a long period of time. You are trying to add value, get them excited to work with you, win the opportunity to even look at the deal. And then, I don't know, if you win at the end, you're handing somebody a $6 million check instead of gaining revenue, but it's really the same process. And so I think about the parallels there, and there's so much I learned on the software side that applies to venture, and getting to put all that together is pretty fun.
Is there anything you miss about the operating side that you don't do anymore?
The two that I miss the most, one is being part of a team. We obviously have a team in venture internally, and you are part of each of these companies, but your day-to-day is very different. You're not working towards this one goal altogether. Each partner is working with different companies, and it just feels a little bit different. And the second part is these monumental wins. I think when you're in an operating role, there's lofty goals that you're working towards. And when you win together, it's the combination of the team dynamic and accomplishing something. It's hard to get that same feeling in the venture role because the feedback loop is so long. I think I've made some great investments. I'm really excited about the companies I'm working with, but I'll let you know in 7 to 10 years whether those were the right choice or not. And that's a kind of a crazy timeline.
That's really interesting. How do you stay grounded when some of the startups that you've led for Stage 2 capital are showing phenomenal progress? They're going through a Series C round, a Series D round. They're raising a huge amount of capital. Their growth is just going off the charts. You must somewhat celebrate those milestones along the way, or do you just take a step back and you're waiting for that exit opportunity to finally give yourself a pat on the back?
I'm going to be really honest with you, Harrison. We're not there yet. So I've made most of my investments with Stage 2 over the last 2 to 3 years. And so we have companies that are raising B rounds, but it's very early days for these startups, right? Mm-hmm. There are, generally around $1 million in ARR when we make our first investment. And so we're not staring down any massive companies at this point. They're really doing very well, and they're raising the next round. We've got a couple of companies who are out raising their B round right now, and that's super exciting to see them make that progress. But really, we're more fixated on the fundamentals of the business versus those external factors, particularly given the stage. And so we're celebrating what's the plan we put out? Are we hitting the quarterly number? Are we seeing all the sales reps on the board? Are we building product quickly? What is our customer satisfaction and retention levels? And those signals get us really excited right now of what's to come. And then I think if you ask me that question again in a couple of years, I hopefully will have a different answer.
Also keeping an eye on what you can control, what you're measuring, what you're monitoring, and the levers that you can use to influence those. So you're staying very in touch with the startups post-investment. I think it's a good segue to talk a little bit more about Stage 2 capital, the fund that you're now a partner at. Yes. They're now in their third fund, writing $2 to $5 million checks at the seed to Series A stage for B2B software companies. Would you be able to give us a 2-minute synopsis on why Stage 2 capital is the best VC fund for any B2B SaaS entrepreneur to take capital from today?
Yeah. We were founded around this idea that there are a couple of very risky points for a startup, particularly as it comes to go to market. And so what I mean by that is as you make the transition from founder-led sales to first professional seller, or from first professional seller to scaling up your go-to-market team, there are these very risky moments where you can derail and make mistakes. And we think there's a lot of opportunity to do that better and to help support founders on that journey. And so we were founded with the idea, how to de-risk those moments. And the two pretty fundamentally different things we do than other VCs. One is we work in a pod model, which means 2 partners are on every deal. Someone with like an operating and go-to-market background, someone with a more traditional finance and VC background. And the idea there is like the founder doesn't have to choose the profile of the partner they work with. They get access and like the benefits and skills of both. And then the second piece of that is actually how we raise money. We have large institutional investors like MIT's endowment fund, and we also have a really amazing set of individual LPs who are operators. So we now have over 800 CROs, CMOs, heads of sales operations, enablement, all these go-to-market execs who have literally voted with their checkbooks. So when we're calling on them for a one-off question, a talent referral, a prospect introduction, a advisor, consultant, board member, sales kickoff presenter, like insert your idea here. This network has just been unbelievably helpful to the startups in our portfolio. And I would say those 2 things have really set us apart and allowed us to have very real impact on how we think about go-to-market and helping companies. And then, the final piece behind this, we have a number of frameworks that we have developed and really work closely with companies to introduce post-investment. And that's really like kind of the nitty-gritty of how we think about go-to-market.
So you're absolute go-to-market specialists. That is the USP of the fund. You don't just get an investing partner that might be able to help you fundraise or call up a few friends and help you with the Series B. You're getting down nitty-gritty, working alongside founders, and also tapping your extremely large network of current operators as well, who are directly invested in the fund. I've seen some really good blogs on this space written by yourself.
We have on stage2.capital, we have our blog and some incredible pieces from our LPs, from partners. And then I also run a secondary blog called Dear Stage 2. The idea there is actually we get constant questions from our portfolio, from individuals in the network. And what we started doing was just saying, let's answer those publicly. So rather than like me writing a long email that goes to a CEO and then I'm hunting for that again when somebody asks me the question 6 months later, make it public. I take those questions every week and write a go-to-market advice column.
I've read a few and I actually really like them. I think you're a great writer and there's some super helpful advice for founders. One of the blogs I was reading talked about leading indicators of customer retention. Could you tell us a few examples of some really niche leading indicators that you found startups have identified in their customer process, in their customer onboarding or life cycle?
I'd say like the way to think about leading indicators of retention if somebody is seeing it for the first time, like there is a great piece on our website that Mark Roberge wrote. He was the founding CRO of HubSpot, and this whole framework that we use came from him and his time at HubSpot. And at the time when he was running this sales org, they were selling to an SMB audience and they had a churn challenge. And he was trying to figure out we don't want to wait until the end of an annual contract to know if a customer is at risk. How can we identify earlier whether a customer is successful and whether we're getting better at making them successful? And so this whole model is predicated on look at the customers you acquire either at an individual level or over time on a cohort level, like quarterly or monthly, where you have a set of customers you can compare, and make sure that you are delivering the value you expect to and getting better at it over time. So the first thing you want to do is figure out like what product usage metric, something that is like tangible, data-driven, that you can see and identify and observe, actually ties and is closely correlated with retention. That might be something like have used 5 features in the last 30 days. That might be, 80% of customers in the cohort are logging in at least 50% of the days in a month. That might be the number of destinations that a customer sets up, because we know that's closely correlated with value. It's very unique to each business. The critical piece is just make sure it aligns to customer value and have a binary metric of whether you have done it or not that you can measure easily. And what we find is having any of them, even if it's not the perfect metric, actually gets you way more focused on retention and gets the team rallied around making progress. You can change it over time, but it's trying to get everybody focused on if we get customers to do this thing, they are more successful with us long term. And then checking in on that to make sure they're continuing to do it. And if you see a dip, identifying and going in to dig in. So that's how we think about leading indicators of retention. We try to set it up with each of our portfolio companies, and it has been a really eye-opening experience. And then it gets like much more sophisticated over time as people start to cut it by segment or by industry, or like there's a bunch of different things you might look at, but like a simple one to start is definitely what we like to see.
I really like that. I think Facebook had a very famous one where it was the number of friends that you had connected to within the first X days of logging in, and then really pushed that as one of the first, like above, before the newsfeed probably was even out. They just pushed that as a key feature for every user, just to add all their contacts, and then that would build on the networking effects of the platform itself. There are some frameworks and theories that have worked over time when it comes to go-to-market. Have you seen anything change?
Constant change is the answer. And I think there are some fundamentals that have like held true. Understanding the metrics behind the business, what your cost of acquisition is, what your payback looks like, how your funnel converts, what you're tracking in your funnel. They may be different for businesses, but still tracking all of those things and taking insights from them is really critical. But I think how we act on them has changed a lot. The strategies that were working for marketing in, the 2015 period when I was first doing outbound, like definitely different than what's working today. And I think we've seen that journey from pretty strict like outbound prospecting to the rise of like inbound content marketing to product-led growth. And when I think about what's working today, some of my current observations, I'm finding that like events and in-person time are working very well again. I'm seeing influencers and micro-influencers as a channel, less scalable, but often like very high conversion, getting in front of the right audiences. I think what's changed though is particularly on outbound, we spent the last 5 to 8 years figuring out how to automate everything. And that has led to really high volume of really bad emails getting sent. And what I'm seeing work now is a reversion to more of an account-based strategy with a very small targeted list, hyper-personalized emails, potentially using tools to help along the way, but trying to go much narrower and deeper with accounts and being much more thoughtful in that prospecting, and that is delivering. And then the last thing that's changed is the tech stack, and you think about what tools are working for what companies at any given time, and it is just a constant series of new entrants into this go-to-market space, and we are always thinking about, what's the next hack that's going to work for X period of time, and trying to get ahead of that.
Yeah, I imagine there is a repertoire of instruments that a founder can use, but actually selecting the right one at the right time is where expertise and having exposure to a VC fund with 800 operating partners who can say, hey, this is working for us really well, would be instrumental and actually move the dial when it comes to strategizing for your outreach campaigns.
Yeah, it's definitely the goal. We're also thinking about how to make connections across the portfolio. So for example, we have 3 portfolio companies that sell into restaurants and to the hospitality space, and they're sharing with each other, if they find a really great data source or a tool that's working for them to build territories, like how do we bring those learnings to the broader group, knowing that like, hey, that's a niche problem. I'm not going to share that with another portfolio company that doesn't sell to restaurants, but making that connection at the right moment between our portfolios companies can be critical.
What kind of things do you see founders getting wrong after they take that big check at the Series A stage? Do people go a bit crazy? Do they start spending? What would you say is a common misstep for founders at that stage?
Yeah, ramping spend too quickly is probably like the number one mistake we see. And I think for good or bad, that comes often from top-down pressure of the board sets an arbitrary number of, we want to 3x or 4x next year. And often that leads to people hiring really quickly. We try to take a much more reserved approach to that, building a bottoms-up model, understanding if you just continued with your current performance today, where would we end next year? And then think about what assumptions we can layer into that and what would it take to go hit whatever the top-down number is. And often that means we need to make additional hires, but one of the things we caution against is don't make those hires until you have the demand gen and leads to support them. Putting 3 more sellers in seat is just going to add to your burn number unless they are fed leads and you have a plan to get them productive. And so throttling hiring and figuring out what are the milestones that unlock hiring is really critical. The other thing that I think I see a lot, it's not always a mistake, it is an overvaluing of industry experience, and particularly in sales hiring. I hear from a lot of founders that they're looking for someone who has sold to their exact buyer or sold a very similar product before. One of the things we found over time is that industry experience generally doesn't matter that much. There might be a few exceptions to that, but like a very strong seller with good fundamentals and like an incredible work ethic is going to be successful in a bunch of different scenarios, as long as they understand the motion. Like I wouldn't hire a sales rep who has worked at Calendly, like moving these PLG inbound leads through the funnel to go sell an enterprise solution that's 300, very different motion. But if you know the motion, I think you can kind of move across industries quickly. And so, I think we encourage people to think more about the actual sales and sales leadership skills and less about industry experience.
Makes a lot of sense, but you probably need the right amount of structure internally to have that coaching of the sales team and having them get to a place where they're beating or exceeding what might have been achieved by someone with industry experience. Vertical software is a very big focus for Stage 2 Capital.
Yeah.
What do you see as the biggest opportunities in that space?
We're spending time in a lot of different areas. We see opportunities in, Industry 1.0 and thinking about construction and manufacturing. We did a deal last year at a company called AeroCloud, who sells into airports, back office and gate management, flight information display, common use passenger processing, all of the like nuts and bolts of how an airport runs. I think there are still many industries that have these sort of large incumbents that are older technology, have a huge opportunity to be disrupted by AI right now. I think one of the reasons we're excited about vertical software is there is still opportunity for a lot of disruption, generally like fewer competitors, what looks like potentially a smaller market from the outside. But when you think about some of the really big wins, like a Procore, for example, there is just a huge amount of opportunity as you start with something really critical and a wedge in and can expand what you do for those companies over time.
How do you feel about threats and defensibility? Because this is a new era where we're seeing companies be built by a solo founder using some AI and some incredible coding technologies that turn them into a superstar. How's that influenced the investment decisions for Stage 2?
There's kind of two things wrapped into that and what you said. I think the first actually is more about efficiency. And we love founders who are constantly thinking about how much can I get done before I make another hire? And like, how do I maximize the value of each hire I make? And a lot of that comes down to tooling and workflows and process and just generally a mindset shift. And then I think the second piece you alluded to around defensibility and building a moat is something we spend a lot of time on. When we are making an investment, a very critical piece of that evaluation and diligence is what are the current differentiators, which of those are defensible, and how do you build a moat over time? And is something we continue to look at in our own portfolio as well. That can come through different things. I think there are some companies where you look at it and think there's a first mover advantage, and having these like early adopters is going to allow you to move faster and further. There's data, which is like generally a very common one, thinking about what is the data you're amassing and why is that unique to you relative to others. And then I think one of the other things we're just, evaluating is like, what is the competition doing and what would it take for someone to replicate what you're doing today? Like, why are you ahead? I think a lot of that comes through our calls with customers, through our calls and work into market, but it's definitely something we spend a lot of time on.
Angel investors are guilty, perhaps more than professional investors, of not thinking about that point a little bit more, and the rate of improvement that we're seeing with artificial intelligence and how that could break down barriers to building software companies.
For what it's worth, I don't think many of the companies we're looking at like a seed or a series A actually have like a true defensible competitive advantage today. We think of it more as like what's differentiated that could be defensible in the future. Like there's not like, very rarely do you see a company that like no one else could replicate that. What they have is a head start and an opportunity to build a moat. I'll give an example if you want. Like I look at, a company in our portfolio like Slang. Slang.ai is like voice agents for SMBs. They've started in restaurants. And if you call a restaurant, you can talk to their AI agent in natural language and you can make a reservation. So part of what's really cool about what they've done is they have started with a very focused set of restaurants. So they are going to amass a really critical data set about restaurants, about the kinds of questions that people ask restaurants. And then they've also invested in building integrations with like all the players in that space. So they just announced a reservation integration with OpenTable. And something like that, then when you pair those things together, is much more defensible against a other voice AI horizontal player who's going after a bunch of verticals. So the integrations, the data they're amassing, those things over time are going to create a moat for them. It's hard to say that that's really a moat today. They're in the earliest innings of doing this, but it's a really big opportunity.
There's nothing worse than calling up a restaurant and they just have a human on the line and you can't get through because there's 4 other people on the line trying to get through. And using AI and agents, I imagine you can have multiple concurrent calls happening in parallel and bookings have it happening automatically, which...
I was alluding to the fact that they're even answering the phone. Like, I feel like I keep calling restaurants recently and I get a voicemail that just says, if you'd like to make a reservation, go on Resi. Like, they don't even answer their phone. Stop staffing it.
Terrible. And there was that big piece in the New York Times about people selling restaurant reservations not too long ago. I don't know if you saw that.
Crazy.
Upselling restaurant, making over $100,000 a year just doing that, which is quite smart.
Reselling them. Wild.
Have you seen, or have you experienced any real horror stories? And I'm not asking you to name names, but have there been any surprising moments with founders that have just been instant put-offs? What kind of things do you get to see? What kind of things are you looking for that?
I've definitely worked on deals where you uncover some crazy things in diligence. And one of the most basic things we do is just like Google the founder. You'd be shocked at like how far you can get into a process, and just like a basic Google will uncover something very obvious. They've been sued, they've committed a crime, they're whatever. There's stuff that happens that like you need to go get the story on, and it would be negligent not to. As far as like with our portfolio though, I think surprises come in different forms. Generally, like we're spending a lot of time with teams before we invest, and so I feel like we have a very good view of what we're getting into. But the relationship when you are selling yourself and like buying into a deal is very different than when they open the doors and say, hey, like we're in this together. And so I don't think they're bad surprises. I'm not like thinking of something like, oh my God, like I wish I hadn't done that investment. Not at all. Instead, what I'm thinking of is like, how do I refine my process to figure these things out sooner? There's probably something in the relationship that we could do earlier to like have a more open conversation about certain things. And that really comes down to trust. So I don't like fault a founder for not sharing openly, but the sooner we can get into a place of trust, the faster we can have impact and work together on something. So now I guess I don't have a good explosive story for you, but I do think there's always surprises, and many of them come in the form of like founder and team dynamics.
No, that's a really good answer. I'm just thinking, I worked at JP Morgan for 2 years and they acquired a fintech. I don't know if you saw this in the news, but it turned out the founder had lied about the number of customers that she had, and was completely fraudulent and used a PhD to put addresses with names and make it all look very legitimate. And it was only uncovered a year after. Yeah, it was only uncovered 12 months after they bought it for over $100 million. When they brought the marketing in-house and realized all these emails were just getting bounced back because they were fake. But let me flip it then. What have been your proudest moments at stage 2 so far?
Yeah. I think there's a few things that stand out. One, when we like genuinely can help a company do something. So when they put their hand up and say, I need X, and we can actually deliver on that. Part of that is like the assistance of the company. The other part of that to me is just reputationally, like we do what we say we're going to do. And if we say we can help with something, I want to show up and do that. And so I'm thinking of a couple of moments where somebody said, I need an introduction. I'm trying to get into this particular prospect. And like, we have been trying for 6 months. Like, can you get us in? Or we're trying to find an advisor that can help with XYZ thing, and like finding the right person in the right moment. Those are really proud moments. I think the other piece, and because it like loops our LPs in with our companies too, and figuring out the intersection there is an opportunity for both. And then sharing in the wins of the company. Like, I love getting pulled into a monthly update email or something that's going out to like a town hall or an all hands meeting, and like the celebrations that happen when they're working towards something and win. And I know this kind of like harkens back to our earlier conversation about what I miss in operating, but seeing them like grind and work towards something and then have that celebration moment, like those are incredible moments.
So Liz, this has been a really, really good episode. Thank you for the insights that you've given us today. Founders and investors can learn a lot from what we've heard today. For everyone looking to get more information about go-to-market strategies, I really recommend that they go and visit your blog at dearstage2.com. I'm going to link it in the show notes as well. Thank you for your time.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.